Hi buddies! Welcome to Emergency Pineapple Studios, where I talk about things that I love and hopefully you do too. And today, we're going to be talking about D&D. Today, we're going to specifically talk about combat roles for party dynamics. What this means is that every party will have a certain formation and certain roles you play when in combat. In total, there are 5 of these, and I'm going to go into detail about all 5 of them so you can learn what they are. So, without further ado, let's get started. The 5 combat roles for a balanced party are as follows. They are Tank, Damage, Support, Healer, and Jote. Let's start with the tank. When someone is talking about a tank in RPGs, they are not necessarily talking about the modern war machine. Well, sometimes they feel like they are, but they're really not. What they're actually talking about is a character who can take a lot of damage and hold the enemy's attention so that the rest of the party can do the rest of their jobs. Where they can dish out heavy amounts of hits, usually for one-time attacks, their main purpose is to absorb or take attacks. Tanks come in 3 different types: health, armored, and resistance. Health tanks are called this because they usually have a lot of HP to go along with whatever they can do. This means that they can take the full brunt of something and have enough HP to keep going. Most of the time, they have a low AC, and a lot of times they have a high speed, meaning they can move across the battlefield as quickly as possible, and they use their natural HP to be able to tank any hits that they would take. The downside is they're actually fairly easy to hit. Meanwhile, the opposite of that is the armored tank. Armored tanks usually wear a whole bunch of armor to essentially get a high AC, meaning it's hard to do damage to them, and if you do damage to them, it's usually minimized based on whatever armor they're wearing. However, the armor comes at a price, usually in their speed and their stealth. So usually you can see an armored tank coming from a mile away, but at the same time, their job is to be seen. They want to be seen. They want to be hit. A resistance tank is a tank who has abilities that lower the amount of damage of certain damage types, so that way they can minimize the amount of damage that they take. They are usually faster than an armored tank, but usually have a higher AC than a health tank. The whole premise of having a resistance tank is so that in certain situations, they can reduce the damage to either 0 or near 0. Now, in D&D, there are 5 classes that can be tanks. 2 of them based on the class themselves, and 3 based on their particular subclass. The 2 that are the best at being tanks just based on the class they are Barbarian and Paladin. Barbarians are primary health and resistance tanks because they have the highest hit die, meaning that they will have the most amount of HP normally, and depending on which subclass you pick, they get a bunch of resistances to go along with it. In contrast, a Paladin will get quite a few resistances and immunities, but they are able to wear heavy armor, and where they can have decent health, it's nowhere near as high as the Barbarians is going to be. The 3 that are tanks based on what kind of subclass you decide to pick are Fighter, Monk, and Cleric. Fighters, if they are tanks, are armored tanks. Monks, if they are tanks, are resistance tanks. And Clerics, if they are tanks, are armored tanks. The next role for a balanced party is the damage combat role. Where the tank's job is to take hits and seem like a threat, the job of the damage dealer is simply to be the threat. They are the ones who deal out as much damage as humanly possible. Or whatever race they happen to be at the time. Like the name implies, the entire point is to do massive damage either by hitting often or hitting as hard as possible. Most of the time, the people who have this role are sometimes called clothies or squishies simply because they don't have a very high AC and sometimes they don't even have a very high health pool. So they can dish it out, but they certainly can't take it. Now, some can take it better than others, but most of the time, they don't want to be taking damage, they want to be doing it. They usually come in 2 types. They are either doing physical damage or magical damage. Now, the ones who tend to do physical damage, that means they are doing either bludgeoning, piercing, slashing damage, things that can be done with a physical weapon. Most of the time, the guys who are doing the physical damage have a variety of ranges. They can be melee or long range. The downside of that is because their damage types are so limited, they are very much relying on whatever equipment they happen to have. So if they don't have the right equipment for the job, they're not going to be able to do as much damage as they could. The second type of damage dealer are spell slingers, and their whole purpose is to shoot as many spells or to hit with a really powerful spell on the enemy. The advantage to having these is because they're using magic, they have more options for doing damage. The different damage, they can do damage using fire, cold, lightning, force, psychic. They have just generally more options in the damage types. What they are limited on is spell slots. Where a physical damage dealer just relies on the ability to be able to hit their target, a spell slinger's issue is, do they have the necessary spell slots to do the damage that they want to do? And did they use the right one? If they don't use the right one, it could actually end up really bad for the player, so be very careful with this. From my estimate, there are 6 classes that are actually designated damage dealers. These are Fighter, Ranger, and Rogue for the physical damage dealers, and for the spell slingers, they are Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard. Fighters tend to be very good damage dealers when it comes to close combat, Rangers tend to be the best for ranged combat, and Rogues actually can go back and forth between the two. Sorcerers, on the other hand, are the massive damage dealers based on being a sorcerer because of their sorcery points and their ability to use meta magic. However, build a wizard or a warlock right, they will be shooting more spells than the sorcerer can even count. One point of mention, any class can actually cover the damage roll if it needs to be done. The 6 I mentioned are the ones who are best equipped to do it. The next role is the support role, and the whole purpose of this is to do one of 2 things. You're either buffing your allies or debuffing your enemies. Surprisingly though, there are actually 3 types of support roles. The first one is called a pure support, the second one's a saboteur, and the third is an environment changer. A pure support character, like the name implies, their entire purpose is to use their spells or abilities to provide buffs to their allies. Now, these buffs can do anything from make your characters go faster, they can make your characters bigger, sometimes they can make your characters hit harder, sometimes they give them like a bonus resistance. Whatever buff you're giving to your allies, it doesn't matter. However, usually pure supports can do one person at a time early on. Sometimes they have like massive effects, but usually they're giving like, oh, I'm going to cast this on you now, or because I am here and I'm in this area, my buddy next to me can also get an advantage doing this. So normally, like I said, pure support characters provide the support in single outbursts. The second type of support character is a saboteur. As the name implies, the saboteur's job is to sabotage their enemies. They usually do this by one of doing like 3 things. They are providing disadvantage onto the enemy, doing some sort of status effect like charmed, frightened, poisoned, all that fun stuff. Or when they hit something, they actually cause like an actual bad thing to happen. Like they cause an opponent to trip when they kick them. Or they basically have the ability to knock a weapon out of someone's hand. Or they can make an entire character mute so the spellcaster can't cast spells. Kind of like the pure support, usually they do one thing at a time or for one target, but as they get more powerful, they're able to hit more targets depending on what kind of support character they are. This leads us to the third type of support character, the environment changer. What makes the environment changer different from the saboteur or the pure support is the fact that most of the time they are affecting all targets, both enemies and allies, because their target is the environment itself. These are the characters who like to cause difficult terrain. These are the characters who like to set traps. These are the characters who like, change the weather or cause something that affects everybody. This can turn the tide of battle in either your favor or your detriment. You have to be careful with this because they do not discriminate when they use their abilities. Their abilities affect everybody. But if your allies know how to deal with whatever chaos you happen to bring, they can take advantage of that. However, you have to make sure that the environment change is to your advantage and not your enemies. So please be careful with this. So the classes that usually make the best support characters are bards, wizards, and warlocks. Wizards tend to be really good pure support, whereas warlocks tend to be really great saboteurs. And bards actually can go back and forth between the two. Now, as far as environment changers, I genuinely say that there's quite a few, especially the spellcasters, that are really good at it. But in my opinion, I think the best environment changers are actually clerics, druids, and rangers. Because most of the time, these are the characters who are the best at setting traps or changing some aspect of what's going on around them, either by divine intervention or by natural causes. The fourth combat role is the healer. And this one is probably one of the most important roles to have, because without them, the party is dead. As the name implies, their entire job is to heal the party, by either restoring hit points that have been lost, removing any status ailments caused, preventing certain damages from happening, or, when things go really bad, resurrecting their friends. Yeah, the healers really need hugs, guys. Come on, they are the ones pulling all the weight. In D&D, there are two classes that are by themselves designated as healers, and they are clerics and druids. However, the reason they are healers are because they're two different types of healers. Clerics are something called divine healers. Divine healers, their jobs are to channel the power of divinity to cause miraculous healing. Druids, on the other hand, are natural healers. Natural healers are beings that call upon the forces of nature in order to cause healing. Now, where clerics and druids are the designated healers, they're not the only ones that can do it. Recently, bards and paladins are also capable healers. However, bards usually make for a better support role, and paladins are much better as a tank, but both of which can be healers if needed. Also, another side note for the healers especially is that there are now quite a few subclasses in different places that provide healing bonuses, so make sure you read your subclasses because sometimes you become the designated healer. The last combat role is called a Jote. Jote is actually an acronym that stands for Jack of All Trades. And if the name doesn't give it away, the whole purpose of this character is to be fluid. A Jote's job is usually to cover wherever they are most needed in any particular situation. These are the guys going back and forth between being multiple roles. You need an extra tank because your tank's running low on HP. The Jote usually becomes the secondary tank going, I got you, I can do it now. It's like, you need a little extra boost and support. The Jote's got you covered. They're going to help the support characters by covering whatever your support character isn't doing. The healer goes down, the Jote goes in. My job is to heal you guys. And if none of those situations arrive, they are extra damaged ahead. The class that is the best Jote is the Bard. And not just because they actually have an ability called Jack of All Trades, it is just because the Bards are actually built to be Jacks of All Trades. The problem with Jote characters, though, is because they have such a wide variety of things they can do, they're not really great at any of them. They can become good at them, like they can become good tanks, they can become good support, they can become good healers, but they're not going to excel at it as a certain character who is designed to be that way. Even if you build a very tanky bard, it's still not going to be as good as if you build like a tanky barbarian or a tanky paladin. But at the same time, the Jote character can fill a secondary role no matter what you need. Essentially, the best way to describe it is the Jote is the wildcard character. And for any balanced party, you need one. Because this is the character who can usually change everything. These are the ones who usually are the ones in control of the battle. And those are all the combat roles for a balanced party formation. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, make sure to leave them in the comments below. And see you next time. Have fun delving those dungeons.